the wedding photographer genius with a bunch of awards on her wall behind her, if you can see. How did you start as a wedding photographer?
Well, it's one of those things I just sort of fell into. I was in between careers and thought, what do I want to do with my life this decade? So I decided I would just go out and buy a camera and teach myself. And I ended up doing a little course that really helped get me on track. And I did a lot of family photography and all. You sort of bite your teeth on that type of stuff because it's hard to bite your teeth as a new career in photography as a wedding photographer because you can't just be learning at someone's wedding when they're expecting great things from you.
Of
So
course.
I advertised on Gumtree and said, I'll shoot your wedding for free if you just expect nothing in return. And if you get one great photo, it's a bonus. And I gave them heaps of good photos and built my portfolio until I was confident. And I went out there and just started shooting weddings. And I think I was only in my maybe third year or second year of being a wedding photographer when I was contacted by the Australian Bridal Industry Academy saying that I'd been nominated for an award. And I was like, what? Really?
Wow.
Serious? But it went on to winning nearly 20 awards. And Sarah, I won New South Wales twice. And it's a really tough competition. But I really wanted to win Australia and I tried so hard. I came in top 10 in Australia for 10 years. And I came second. I came runner up with a score of 99.78%. And that wasn't a good enough score to win, and I was second. So, I nearly got there. So I'm pretty proud of my achievements.
Oh, I can imagine that is a massive achievement because for those that don't know, there are so many wedding photographers out there, and it is such hard competition when it does come to things like that. So I'm very proud of you. You should be very proud too.
Oh, well, thanks, Sarah Kate. Yes,
Oh,
I am proud. And it's incredibly competitive. And there's also a lot of wannabe wedding photographers out there. And my photographer who works at my venue, Dave, we call them Uncle Bobs.
okay.
So when you've just got someone who's just like, they kind of know what they're doing, but not really. They haven't got a professional business. They're out there winging it. We call them Uncle Bobs. So it's what's the word? No reflection on if your name's Bob and you're a photographer. It's just kind of the name we go, oh, there's Uncle Bob. Like I was at or should I say this? I was at a wedding, yes, recently.
Go for it.
And the photographer, I'm sitting there and his camera kept beeping every time he used it. Like there's a beep on your camera you just don't have on when you're professional. And the camera
No.
beeped. And I was like, what the? Am I going to go tell Uncle Bob that there's a beep feature on his camera he needs to turn off? So that's often the giveaway for an Uncle Bob or how they hold the camera really weird. You always know a professional photographer by the nature of how they hold their camera.
Oh, that's a really good tip, and that's a very funny story because that would drive me crazy if I was a bride getting ready to be married and I would hear beep, 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 beep,
This was at the
beep.
ceremony.
Oh
Beep,
no.
beep, beep through the ceremony. And I was like, oh my Lord, I just had to turn the other way. So,
Oh my
yeah,
goodness. Oh, well, a good thing that you weren't running that wedding. So that's very good.
if I was running that wedding, that camera would not have been beeping.
It would not have been beeping at all. So we know that there's a lot of Uncle Bobs out there, but there had to be something that inspired you to get into weddings because it is a tough gig.
Yeah.
What was that?
Because I had to pick the hardest possible thing because I'm just one of those people that I need a challenge. And I
Okay.
found with doing my family photography and stuff that, well, if I didn't get a shot right, I could reset it and do it again. And I worked with a lot of musicians, and I was the corporate photographer for LJ Hooker in Sydney, for National Australia Bank, for the Cruise Line Industry Awards. I did a lot of stuff, but it still wasn't enough. And I thought, how much pressure are you under as a wedding photographer? Like you think, Sarah, when someone's at the altar and they kiss, imagine if you miss that. I just
I
something
know.
about that pressure that drives me that
No.
I had to pick the hardest possible thing and nail it, which I did, yes, and I did, yes.
That's a very fair point. And that also kind of leads me on to, again, bringing up Uncle Bob. How important do you think it is to actually book a professional wedding photographer and make sure that they are
Yeah.
professional? for when it comes to a wedding, because as you said, you don't want those key moments getting missed.
Look, and this is opening up a really big can of worms, and I think this is what we're going to
Mm.
be doing for quite some time. I'm going to have my can opener sitting here. We're going to constantly be opening up cans of worms because it's not the same for everybody. Like I
Mm,
know people that say, I don't care about photos on my wedding day. And there's nothing wrong with that, Sarah. They might
that's right.
say, hey, as long as my guests take some photos on their iPhones, and if someone gives, if I kind of round up 20 or 30 decent photos from my wedding, I'm happy. There's people like that, and there's nothing
There
wrong with
is.
that. But I just feel from being a photographer that a wedding is such an incredibly important occasion in your life. It's one of those, like having your child, getting married. They're real key moments. And I just feel not having that captured as beautifully as it can be captured by someone who's a professional, it does almost feel like a little bit of a shame. And I'm sure that there's couples out there that don't book a photographer that afterwards really wish they did. Then there's others
Mhm.
like you, which stay tuned, you're going to hear the story. Booked a professional photographer, you did the right thing, and you met with him, I believe, and sort of
Yes.
everything. And he turned out to be a bit of a dud. So I'm going to hopefully navigate you through that to not pick the Uncle Bob duds. But if you
Yes.
don't, if photos aren't that important to you and you just go, as long as I get a couple of good selfies of me on my wedding day, that's enough, it's okay. But if you do love photos and you want your photos to look like from the cover of a magazine, you have to book a professional photographer. There is just no getting out of it if you want those amazing photos.
Yeah, and that's very true, and I think the thing is, as you'll hear from my story very soon, it is important, and it's also important to get referrals as
Referrals,
as
referrals,
I learnt.
referrals.
Absolutely. So, I think the thing is, Sue, a lot of people are concerned with price when it does come to wedding photography, and I guess, photographers can range from $300 to 10,000 and above. So, how much do you think what do you think is a fair price for a good wedding photographer these
Okay,
days?
where's that
Or
piece of
what do
string?
they usually charge? I
I'm
know,
looking for
it's
that
very
piece of string.
tricky.
How long's a piece of string? Because at the end of the day, with
Yeah.
anything in life, something is worth what someone's going to pay for it. It can be a house that someone says, "Oh, that's worth 400,000," but if someone's prepared to pay 700,000, that's what it's worth. And so this becomes quite difficult. I think what happened before COVID, pre-COVID, we were saturated with photographers.
Mm.
There were so many that wedding photography was really quite cheap. Like I would look at something on Facebook and I would see someone that looks like they're doing decent work. I can generally pick if a photographer knows what they're doing just by looking at one or two photos. You can generally pick it, and someone might be good and say, "Hey, I'll come and shoot your wedding for 4 hours for $500." And I would go, "Whoa, what? How can you do that? That's so cheap." But then there might be someone else saying, I shoot for 4 hours and I'm $6,500 and their work looks similar. Pre COVID, with that saturation, COVID did one thing, which probably wasn't a bad thing, and it weeded everyone out. And a lot of people couldn't go the distance. Their businesses crumbled. So I'm finding now there's not a real overflow of wedding photographers around because a lot of them ended up getting full time jobs doing something else and have decided just, not to go back to it. So COVID wasn't good, but it really did sort the wedding industry out. So there's not as many to choose from now, Sarah, but you have to say, I'm on a budget and I have $1,000 and no more. I have $2,000 and no more. I have $500 and no more. And
Mhm.
really need to sort of be looking at that's it. Sometimes you can contact a photographer and say, listen, here's the deal. I really love your work. I'm getting married on a Wednesday. If they're not available, they might do you a deal. You can always ask. But
That's true.
it's like I can go to the reject shop and I can buy something. Then I can go and see that same thing in another shop for 10 times the price and it's the same thing. So sometimes money isn't always relevant to the skill set or how good something is.
Yeah, and I agree. And I guess that also then comes into, how do you know if a photographer has enough experience or not? You
Look,
know?
I think that one's fairly easy, and this is the recommendation that I do give couples when they say, "How do I find one?" So you need to say, "I need to see even if it's 10 photos from 20 weddings." Now that's not a lot to ask a photographer because what happens is someone gets into the industry and they're new, and I see it on their website. They've got the same wedding. Every single
Mm.
photo is the same wedding, which means they might have gone to a wedding, taken 5,000 photos. There might have been 4,500 crappy photos. But out of those ones that left, they were good. They could have spent an hour photoshopping each photo to make you believe how good they are. But it's not about that, Sarah. You need to know someone has shot lots of different ones in different environments and different lighting conditions and sunny and rainy. And I would be saying, and I would love to actually communicate with maybe 3 or 4 of your couples, even if it's just an email, so that I could say, could you just give me a little personal reference on them? So it's about someone that's done at least 20 weddings. I wouldn't want to touch anyone that hasn't done at least that many unless they're giving you a really cheap deal because they're still learning.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point because I think at the end of the day, because you are a wedding planner and you're obviously a photographer, you're around this type of thing all the time. What brides struggle with and get really overwhelmed with is the fact that they're just trying to pick people from a needle in a haystack. So it's really good to actually know that kind of information when it does come to looking at a photographer portfolio to make sure there is a wide variety there and that they have
Agreed.
have seen lots of weddings, not just one or two photos here and there.
Do you know, Sarah, I think another really big thing is when Facebook and social media hit, all these people started businesses literally in 60 seconds. They
Yeah.
started a page. I personally, and it's only a personal belief, not everyone's got to agree with everything I say, but I think that if you don't have a website, I don't class you as professional
Mm.
because it takes money and time and commitment to your business to have a website. Anyone can start just a Facebook page, but I feel like that just gives some credibility. What's your thoughts on that one?
I agree with you. I agree with you in that regard. I think that anyone in any business, regardless of weddings or whatever it is that you are in, I think that when you are at that point in your business to become professional and to take time and be serious about it, that you would invest in a website because it does show people that you are committed and dedicated. Like you said, anyone can start a Facebook page for free. And we all start there because when you do start in business, you don't always have the funds to be able to do that. And you have to start somewhere. But yeah, I
Agreed.
do agree. I think that with brides looking for services and things like that, they should also check that they've got a strong social presence, but they also have a website because I think that, like you said, it does show the fact that they are more professional.
And they're really serious about it. And you
Yeah.
are right. When you start and you don't have the capital for a website, it's okay because you're on Facebook saying, hey, I'm new to this, but I've got a passion. You just get, and obviously, if you're in that situation, the work's going to be lower price.
Yes.
You might be that person that goes, you know what? I don't have much budget. Let's give this person an opportunity to build their portfolio. As long as I get some decent stuff and I'm not paying $10,000, I'm okay. But I really believe if you don't have a website also that has been updated regularly, like I get on websites sometimes
Yes.
and they haven't been updated for like 5 years. And it's like, are you even there? Are you in business? You have to give people confidence in your business. And that is through website, good social media presence.
Absolutely. So I think that they're really great points for brides to look forward, like to use moving forward with booking any supplier, especially photographer, because that is very important. So with photography, I would say another thing is preparation. I don't think people actually understand that good preparation can make amazing photos even better. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Okay, so when you say preparation, you're meaning the environment they're having the photos in?
Yes. environment.
Perfect.
Yes.
I'm so glad you asked Sarah because this is huge. And Sarah would know because she used to come along to weddings with me. And I think what brides do is they get caught up in this fantasy of they look at magazines and Vogue and all these online and printed publications where you just know there's a whole team there. The whole place has been styled, the whole place has been lit, and it's phenomenal. And people think that they're just going to be in their bedroom getting ready and the photos are going to look like that. Like people just go say Photoshop. Well, it doesn't mean anything. You have to take great photos. So, as Sarah would know, you would go to someone's house and where they were getting ready, there would be like piles of clothes and rubbish and mess and just crap everywhere. Like, how are you supposed to take a beautiful photo in that situation? So, poor old Sarah would spend half the time in there picking up dirty clothes and making the bed even so it looked nice. So, backgrounds to photos are absolutely everything. You just can't have you know what it's like, even like a PowerPoint with messy leads and just things that don't look good in photos. Your background preparation is everything and it must look great. Even if you want to blur the background out, it
Mhm.
still has to be a nice background. Like, even just those of you that are watching can see, those are listening, get on and see, is even behind me in this with all my awards and my Yodas. I spent time preparing that. Here's one I prepared earlier so that the background behind me was interesting to look at as well, because I'm not that interesting to look at. So you get this really cool background behind. But if I hadn't have tidied that up, it was just a hot mess.
Absolutely. And we don't want a hot mess on a wedding day. That's what the wedding planners are for, to look like the hot mess. So then the brides and everyone look amazing.
Yes, that is more than true.
I know, it definitely is. So, that's just a great point, making sure that all your backgrounds are clear. And also, I don't know, I think it's a good idea for the bride to maybe have a room that they don't even get ready into until they want to get the photos taken. Do you think that's good advice as well?
I think it's good. Or what I'll say is, if there's stuff everywhere, I'll just say, is there a room here we're not using today that is
Mhm.
going to be the junk room? And I will get anyone that's there, bridesmaids, all of the junk and the messy stuff, I just want thrown into that and shut the door. So you can do it one of two ways: have a dedicated space that just looks beautiful, or we can just get everything out into one room. Super important. And Sarah, not all photographers have the luxury of working with an assistant like I did. And when you're trying to shoot, it's really difficult to be putting your camera down and
Mhm.
doing that menial work when you should be capturing what's going on.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that that's one thing that people also don't take into consideration when looking to hire a photographer, because it's kind of like, and I think people don't actually realize, if you don't have a wedding planner, the photographer is more or less that on the day. Well, a good photographer keeps things
Agreed.
on track. They keep you to your timeline. They try to make sure that everything is happening when it is meant to be happening. Whereas, if you have a wedding planner, that's their job, and then the photographer can just focus on photography, which is what they are really there to do.
Look, that's so true. And the problem is, most people don't have wedding planners. And this is the reason why I wrote my book, was for those people not getting married with me and having me support them all the way through. How can I help people all over the world? And it took me 10 years to put my book together, just to help people. But how are you supposed to know what goes on in a wedding? Like, do you just think, I think people think, well, I've just paid a wedding photographer and they'll just do everything. There's a lot of assumption, but it's no one's fault. So, how are you supposed to know, Sarah? Like, back in the day when you planned your wedding, like, how do you know what really goes on behind the scenes?
I think that's the thing, and I think that comes really brings a photographer back to my story.
Oh,
Um,
do we are we going to hear that?
let's hear the story now, shall we?
All right.
So I obviously got married 16, 17 years ago, so it was quite some time ago, and I did get married in the Hunter Valley, and at that time, not a lot of people or photographers would actually travel up there to shoot weddings. So I found a Sydney-based photographer, and I thought I did the right thing. I actually met with the photographer. I can't recall if they had a website or not, but as I said, that was quite some time ago, and the internet wasn't as big as what it is now. So I met with the photographer, I saw his work, I thought it was lovely, and I went ahead and I booked him. So, for those that heard our first episode, they would know that my lovely wedding photographer decided to turn up in a bright red jumper, which was a tad problematic, seeing he stood out like dogs so and so's, but we won't
Hey,
say that because there
Sarah,
could
just
be.
one quick
Yes,
tiny little just a little bit to add, but I don't want to throw you off, is that
sure.
that's why wedding industry we all wear black to mingle in.
Yes.
But I had a wedding not long ago where the bride requested that Sharon, my celebrant, wear tangerine, which is like orange,
Wow.
because when her mum got married, she asked the celebrant to wear aubergine, which is like a deep purple,
Yes,
and
it
the
is.
celebrant got confused and wore bright orange. So it was a running joke in the family that my celebrant then wore bright tangerine.
Oh, and that's amazing, and if I was all for a theme wedding, I would have been like, "Please wear the things."
But you weren't.
But
You just expected
no,
black or something like that.
I did black or neutral. So that was kind of my, oh my gosh, introduction to my wedding photographer, who I thought was professional. Turned out that still 17 plus years later, I don't have my wedding photos. It was an absolute nightmare to deal with him. I had to reshoot part of my pre wedding photos during my reception because his memory card failed. He also decided to go on a little walkabout at the venue and take photos of that and try to sell them back to my wedding venue, I found out later on. So it was just a nightmare. And that was one of the reasons why I ended up having my own wedding planning business, because I didn't want couples to have to go through that type of thing when it came to picking suppliers.
So do you
So
think, Sarah, do you think he was professional or do you think he was a bit of a scammer? What do you think it
I
was?
I think, look, there were some elements that did come across that he did know what he was talking about. I actually think that he was probably only starting out now looking at it, but I don't believe that the work that he showed me was his. After seeing what we got sent the samples of the photos, but the package included like so many hundred edited, and he sent all of these little files on a CD that were only like 100 kilobytes each. They were very small files for us to look through and pick, and then he was going to edit and print them. And yeah, that just never happened. And I think especially after working with you and starting out as like a photo editor in the wedding industry and then going to weddings with you, um, just then looking at my wedding photos, it made me even more upset because I could see so many more flaws within the work, if that makes sense.
Well, because you'd
So
become professional in the industry, you understood the difference between good and
exactly.
bad photos.
Exactly. So I think that this all comes back to the point when Sue was saying earlier that you really need to see more than a few photos. You really need to talk to past couples when it comes to choosing your photographer, because at the end of the day, if you are someone that really does put a lot of value on your wedding photography, um, you want to make sure that the money that you are spending is going to give you what you expect. And for me, that just didn't happen. And it's still upsetting here and there because I was hoping to be able to have those photos to pass on to my children and to their grandchildren. And unfortunately, that's not going to happen. But I might have to do a vow renewal one day and I might need to find a professional photographer. And it's really good that I know some now. So
Yes, it
that's
is
good.
good that you do.
I know, I know. So that's kind of my horror story when it comes to choosing a so called professional photographer to shoot your wedding. And hopefully that will open some people's eyes. And that's just it. When you're a bride, it is very tricky to navigate things, especially if you're looking in areas where you don't get a lot of service from providers. Um, So if you can just be aware of that and make sure that you research, ask all the questions. Don't worry if you annoy people in that regard, because you're better off asking a question and getting the answer up front than not knowing.
And I think that disappointment from a wedding day is you can't bring it back.
No,
It's
you
gone.
can't.
And even
Yeah, that's
yeah,
exactly right.
so it's so very important.
It is. It is. So I think that we should leave it there today, because we could honestly talk about photography for
I
days. And
know. I
I
think we've
think
got a few episodes just in photography. There's so much to talk
I
about.
I totally agree. We haven't even hit the reception
Nope.
yet, or the timeline. So
Oh,
I
we haven't
think
hit
that that will.
anything other than really the prep. So, oh, yes, we've got a few going there.
I know, I agree 100%. So I think that today we will wrap this up. So guys, be sure to subscribe so then you can find out more about wedding photography in the future. And from me today, it is ciao.
And thanks for tuning in. I love sharing all of my wisdom and knowledge with you all. But you might have a special question you want to ask me. I'm more than happy to answer it. Just drop me an email at yodaofweddings@gmail.com.